This is Community Connections, airing on Aromia 11. I am your host, Anna Orr, and today's guest is no stranger to the Twin Cities. I have Beth Holger here, CEO of the Link, Minnesota, and we are going to talk about Poverty Awareness Month and how you can get more involved. There's going to be a lot of really good information, and I think of quite a few things that are going to make you think. Stay tuned. Thank you for joining me today, Beth.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an incredible honor.
Absolutely. Can you introduce yourself to our viewers and just talk about your role with the Link, Minnesota?
Sure. My name is Beth Holger, and I serve as the CEO of the Link.
Absolutely. And how long have you been doing that amazing work?
Oh, thank you. I have been able to be at the Link for 10 years, and I've been in the field of youth homelessness and anti-trafficking for a little over 23 years now.
Now, we're going to get into a much-needed conversation, but for those that don't necessarily know what the Link does, can you kind of talk about the work that you guys do right here across the metro?
Sure, it's one of my favorite topics. The Link is a youth and adult-led nonprofit based here in North Minneapolis. We were founded by two amazing Black leaders, Jim Marshall and Oscar Reed, who also happen to play for the Minnesota Vikings.
I was just about to say, those names sound kind of familiar.
Yeah, absolutely. When they retired from the NFL, they wanted to do something to help young people on the north side of Minneapolis that were getting impacted by poverty, homelessness, getting recruited to become involved in crime or victimized by crime. So they started the Link. And then now, 30 some years later, we have evolved quite a bit so that we have 3 areas of services and support within our community that really align with one another. So we have a continuum of services and supports for young people and young families experiencing homelessness. We have street outreach, a drop-in center, homeless prevention programs specifically for Black youth and Black young families. We have 2 emergency shelters, one for 10 to 17-year-olds, one for 18 to 24-year-olds, and then we have 9 housing programs providing support for youth and young families. We also have street outreach, a lot of supportive services, a specialized shelter and housing program for youth that have been victims of sex trafficking. And then we also have 5 juvenile justice alternative programs for youth that are, getting involved in the juvenile justice, we call it non-justice system, frankly, but providing support to them and their families as well.
Wow, that's a broad range of support and initiatives. Yes. I can see across the gamut, not only for people that are interested in coming into the center, but like you said, we provide street outreach where people are literally going out to seek people that are needing assistance in our communities. Yeah. Now, we know, but not many other people probably know, that January is Poverty Awareness Month. Mm-hmm. And I brought you in today to kind of help me with a much-needed continued conversation about poverty awareness. Can you kind of speak to why you feel Poverty Awareness Month is important?
Sure. I am so appreciative, again, of being here today and that January is Poverty Awareness Month. And we have a really big crisis in our state with people living in poverty. And it goes without saying that non-white people are disproportionately represented within that population. But I'm just very happy to be here today to help highlight and lift up the issue. We have a lot of people struggling.
I just want to provide a little bit of context for people that are viewing this. Now, the good people at Hennepin County provided a profile with a little bit of information regarding Hennepin County and what the landscape of poverty looks like right here. Now, it says upwards of $78,000 is the median income, with about $21,960 for a family of 3 individuals would be the baseline for you to be considered to get assistance here. Now, when that was established in the 60s, that's maybe a couple $1,000s difference. That has not changed in over 54 years. Mm-hmm. That's a large number. Now, when we talk about poverty right here in Hennepin County, 1 in 10 people live below the poverty guideline. That's over 120,000 people. That's not a small number. And looking at what we're coming off of after COVID-19 and people dealing with situational poverty that have never experienced it before, these numbers aren't minimizing, they're growing. with basic things being hard to attain: housing, healthcare, food, education. I don't understand how we can't better start to help alleviate some of these numbers. With 62% of BIPOC identifiers, while 32% of total county populations identify as BIPOC members of our community, 28% of those have no high school diploma. So for those that believe that we can educate people out of poverty, if 28% of people do not have high school diplomas, I think that seems to be quite difficult to attain. Can you talk to me about the different kinds of poverty that we see here within the United States? I know I just talked softly about situational poverty, but can we kind of talk about generational and some of the many others?
Absolutely. So poverty is, we see it in many different ways, in many different communities. You know, we see poverty within inner cities and urban settings, but we also see it in suburban settings. We see it in rural settings. We see it among our tribal nations and communities. So I first just wanted to say it's something that impacts, you know, every community in our state. Looks a little bit different, and you know, whether you're in different communities. I think we do absolutely see a lot of generational poverty happening. As we know, there are, you know, children being born into families that are already experienced poverty. And so being born into generations of families that have lived and struggled with poverty and making ends meet, that makes it that much harder for them to attain, you know, certain things. They might not have the income or the wealth, for example, to live in a neighborhood that has better education and schools or that has more internship opportunities. I do think that education is one tool that can help people get out of poverty, but there's so much more. We have a huge additional crisis with the lack of affordable housing in our community. And as you pointed to so eloquently just now, we also have a huge problem with not keeping up with inflation for our levels of support that are supposed to help people out of poverty. So our MFIP program, you know, is a great example, or other assistance programs that have not increased their rates, you know, over time. And so we're, you know, have these programs that are set up to help people out of poverty that are set with rates that were set in the 60s. That is just, I mean, that's crazy. And then we have affordable housing that is not affordable for people. So those are some huge problems. So if you're born into something, into generational poverty, it's really tough to get out of it if there isn't housing that you can afford, if the livable wage isn't at a wage that, or I'm sorry, if wages are not at a livable wage where you can afford that housing. So a lot of this is just basic math too. So it's not even about whether or not you have the degree. Do you have a job that pays you well enough to be able to afford housing?
Absolutely.
Are you able to gain assistance from a program that actually is at a rate that can actually assist you out of poverty? It's all of those things.
Now, we talked a little bit about COVID-19 and situational poverty and how generational poverty were both impacted. Now, you know, so many people found themselves in terrible situations of no fault of their own. But do you believe that society began to change during COVID-19, how they saw poverty because of the impact COVID-19 had? Or do you feel that people are kind of, I guess, falling back to their old beliefs that, you know, we should pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, that, you know, all you have to do is just stop being lazy?
Right. You bring up such a good point, because during COVID, there was many learnings during COVID, of course, for all of us. But one thing that was interesting was when there is a wider spread impact of poverty or people losing their jobs or their income, all of a sudden, our state government, federal government, local governments, foundations, people stepped up with resources to support this type of situational poverty. Unemployment assistance was increased, for example. There was different types of emergency supports. And so what that tells me is, why wouldn't we have this level of support for people living in poverty all the time? If we're able to find it in a crisis where it affects a wider spread people, and frankly, I'll be quite honest, more white people, middle class were impacted. So all of a sudden we have the resources when we don't in other times. That was really eye-opening and frustrating to a lot of us working in the field of anti-poverty and homelessness, because we should be always able to help our community members when they're struggling, not just during COVID. I think during COVID we saw a lot more support for people living in poverty during that time. I think what we're starting to see is, and what we're trying to keep the focus on, especially now with the surplus at the legislature, is we need to keep these levels of support up after, the COVID funding runs out from our governments. It's not a one and done. We need to keep, supporting, but it has been really difficult to kind of make sure that this topic stays in the forefront of people's minds, because people tend to get on to the next hot topic.
Right.
And this is still a crisis, so we need to pay attention to it.
I think there was something even as simple as people navigating food, feeding their families. I spoke with someone earlier this week that was running a food shelf, and they were saying, we were having families coming in and thanking us for running the food shelf from once a month to twice a month or 3 times a month, because people found themselves getting to the end of the month and not being able to feed their families. And if they're only getting food at the beginning of the month, people are going hungry. Children are going hungry. Our elders are going hungry in our communities. How have you guys navigated at the Link some of this without, like you said, the consistent support from the government during this difficult time?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. We developed a partnership actually with St. Vincent de Paul, which was really helpful. So they collect food donations from a lot of different restaurants, Costco, different places, and then they, in turn, get it out with no strings attached to those of us serving people who are struggling with poverty or homelessness in a very non-government grassroots way. So we pick up donations from them of food twice a month and then distribute it to the youth and the families that we work with. So that's one way, because absolutely a lot of the mainstream food shelves, and I'm not saying it's their fault, but have certain restrictions on how much food you can get when. It's not always culturally appropriate for the families that are coming in. So we absolutely have gotten creative. We also do wish list Wednesdays and things like that, where we post needs for food. And so we have a lot of individual donors, a lot of faith-based organizations and community partners that do food drives for us outside of the government system that can really truly get at the need. And then yes, we basically get it out to whoever needs it within our organization, without the crazy strings and eligibility that a lot of the traditional ways of providing food have.
Beth, can you talk to me about some of the misconceptions around poverty and partnering with people that may not have a premise for the community you guys serve, or what the beginning of this actually looks like, how to help?
Sure, absolutely. I think one of the biggest misconceptions around poverty is that people are lazy and don't want to work. And it is just not true. That's not true at all. People struggling with poverty and homelessness are some of the hardest workers and strongest people I have ever seen. They are trying to work 2 to 3 jobs that are paying really low wages without benefits. They're taking 3 different buses to get to work, waking up at 3 in the morning because they don't have a reliable car. So they're taking, 2 to 3 buses to get to that job that doesn't pay enough to pay for housing or rent. Necessarily, and they're trying to provide for their children, trying to figure out and navigate childcare. It's just, I've never seen harder workers in my life, honestly, and that misconception really frustrates a lot of us who are either, living in poverty right now, or who are working with those in poverty, because that simply is not true. So the majority of people living in poverty are working, oftentimes working multiple jobs. And that is just not true. I think a second misperception I'd like to address is that people living in poverty are oftentimes, drug addicted, alcohol addicted, and sure, there are some that are. There's a lot of people that aren't living in poverty that are too. Drug addiction and alcohol addiction is something that can impact anybody on any income level. But for some reason, there's that stigma or stereotype about people living in poverty. And yes, there are some, but it's definitely not the majority. And want to say that, again, people who are struggling with poverty, it is not their fault. It's not because they're not hardworking. It is because of the way our systems are set up. It's because of very specific ways that we have oppressed people that identify as Black, Brown, Indigenous in our communities, and it's things that we can work to solve. But it's definitely not because people are lazy or all drug addicted and things like that. That's just not true.
I think we heard a lot from our civic leadership saying, people just need to return to work. People don't want to work. People want to stay at home and they just want to receive benefits. And I think you highlighted a really important issue. I think during COVID, when everyone was in the house or when those that were deemed essential had to keep leaving their homes to try and make sure that our communities kept running, whether it be grocery store workers, daycare providers, nurses, doctors, we realized that people sat down and did the math, that it was more expensive for me to journey to work than it would be for me to stay home and receive the COVID assistance or to go on unemployment, because I'm going to have to pay for things like transportation. Like you said, people are taking multiple buses. Some people pay to park when they get to their jobs.
Right.
Some people take Lyfts or Ubers or cabs to their jobs. Then they have to pay for child care. And I don't think we necessarily navigate what the outgoing cost is for us to actually generate incomes. And if there is a consistent gap in how much I'm earning, how much I net versus how much I'm actually spending, I have to reassess how important is this and what that then looks like. And I think many more of us end up needing help than we like to admit. How have you and your team at The Link navigated some of that work in real time through some of the programs and 28 initiatives you all offer at The Link?
Sure. So we have a couple, everything you're saying is so valid. We have a couple different things. We have a great partnership with Goodwill Easter Seals. So we have co-located employment and career development help within our housing programs for youth and young families that are experiencing homelessness, that helps them to attain some of their post-secondary goals and career goals, gaining employment skills. However, and we've got a lot of great partnerships. We actually hire quite a bit of youth and young families at The Link. And so we do a lot of hiring of our past or current program participants, and we absolutely help support them in getting childcare set up and transportation. What I will say is those two are huge barriers: transportation and childcare. And we do have childcare assistance programs, but it is, it's tricky to get through all the paperwork and get all of that arranged. And so we do our best as staff members to help those young moms and dads and parents get that signed up. We frankly, when young people are working for us at The Link, it's a little unorthodox, but we do allow them before their childcare is set up, or if they don't have childcare, they can bring their babies with them into work. And so we do kind of provide a flexible environment internally that as much as we can. But those are huge barriers, and I think we did see some people, and we see some people that aren't living in poverty make the same decisions, right? Where, now I've had my second child, now I am earning less than what my daycare costs are. So it doesn't make sense for me to go back to work if I'm paying more and then not being able to have time with my children, if my whole paycheck is going to childcare. So I've seen that happen across the board with parents, not just those living in poverty. So I think for some reason we need to get out of that lens of blaming poor people for things that non-poor people are making the same kinds of decisions about.
I think we have had to make some executive decisions on such a large level, and the scope of what our government sees and how they're impacted and what day-to-day people are experiencing, there's a large gap.
Yes.
And I think we heard a little bit about that when we asked the president. The president was asked some time ago, the former president, Donald Trump, was asked, how much does a gallon of milk cost? And it's like, when you mention inflation, and now there's so many other things going on, but we also have to start to address the deficits, not only in our own minds, but in our own biases about different things than how we see people that are less fortunate. There are people who are living in homes and aren't able to feed their families. There's someone on the street who is not able to feed their family. What is the difference? If we're both still struggling, you know what I mean?
Yes.
I just want to talk a little bit about the transition within the United States from the war on poverty in the early 60s to the current war on the poor, so to speak. Within our own Twin Cities Metro, we see our government talking about tearing down the encampments of those that are houseless in our communities right here. How are you all at the link trying to help navigate or experiencing this very real issue in our community?
So this all is very, very true. And I'm not necessarily an academic scholar, but I have opinions and theories. And I think, in the 60s, when there was the war on poverty, again, similar to COVID, the Great Recession impacted everyone. It impacted white middle class, upper class, working poor, everybody. And so then there was, and rightly so, a really big push to do the war on poverty. Then later, kind of fast forward, we had certain elected officials. Former President Reagan was one of them, and I hope it's okay for me to just call him out on it. But there was a lot of kind of undoing of those policies, and a more trickle-down theory became apparent of if we invest more in the top tier of wealth, that'll trickle down. And no, that doesn't work. So unfortunately, there was a lot of the good policies that were created during the war on poverty that was undone during the Reagan administration and continued to get unraveled afterwards. There's a lot of a lot of the viewpoints of people living in poverty kind of changed along that lines and that time as well. To this day, what we have done is we listen first and foremost to the youth and the families on what they want and what they need. And I think that's the most important thing. I think there is, like you said, so much disconnect between some of our elected officials and government with the people actually on the ground with the lived experience who are living in encampments. And so what we work really hard to do is listen to young people and the families, people most impacted, and provide this and work to advocate for the resources and the supports that they need. In the encampments, what's really tough is that, across the state, in Hennepin County, we don't have the level of housing that people living in encampments are asking for, that they want, that they need. We don't have the low barrier, harm reduction kinds of approaches to shelter or places for them to live, or not enough of that. And so we're definitely, that's what I'm hearing anyways, is that we're definitely lacking that. And so therefore we have people that are choosing, or not necessarily choosing, but that are forced to live in these encampments or living outside. And so we as a community need to do a better job of building those up. It really is a system-wide failure. It's not, the police's fault. It's not like, the community member or agency's faults necessarily. It's really something that we need to get together and change policy around and listen to what the people living there want.
I think it's important what you just said, that it's a system failure.
Yes.
I remember during the Super Bowl, when the NFL came here to Minnesota, how it almost seemed like all of the houseless people vanished off the street, like a magic trick. Everyone that you would see that maybe lined down Nicollet Mall or in the Cedar Riverside areas or down Hiawatha where they were for the longest, everyone vanished. And I was told that they were put into hotels and all these other things. And I said, it's interesting where the money comes from.
Exactly.
When something important or deemed important or of relevance is taking place in our area versus the need or the level of importance to make sure that we take care of those less fortunate or underserved every day. Because it matters, because it's important for community, and for us to really reflect the beloved community that Martin Luther King talked about so consistently. Switching gears just a little bit here, what are some of the ways that we can begin to alleviate or lend ourselves to the alleviation of generational poverty? I know that that is such a large part of the apple, it seems, to start to break down.
There are so many levels, and it can seem like an overwhelming problem. And so I know some people can say, oh, it's so big, what can we do? Well, we can do a lot. What I think is, I want to support every single person in our state experiencing poverty, but I think what we can do is start with, in my opinion, those most vulnerable, which is our children and youth that are experiencing homelessness, because they have the most severe level of poverty, and then we build up from there, and then hopefully it prevents it. So right now, there is a coalition of all of us that work in the homeless youth field called the Youth Services Network, along with youth with lived experience of homelessness, that advocate for something called the Homeless Youth Act. And what it is it's advocating at our state legislature for more funding for youth shelter, housing, services, street outreach that lift up these young people out of poverty and homelessness and provide all kinds of opportunity that they need and the affordable housing that they need to be able to get all the things that the goals that they have for themselves. So we are asking for an additional $50 million this year for the Homeless Youth Act. We know in Minnesota it's a solvable problem. We know that there's 4,872 homeless youth a night. We know there's only 312 shelter beds. We know the average costs for all these interventions to help lift these young people out of poverty and then subsequently their children out of poverty. We know that 52% of homeless adults were first homeless as children. So this is, if we start now, it'll prevent future poverty, homelessness. So it's a good way to start. It's a good strategy to start, and that's where we have come up with, we need an additional $1 billion over 2 years, but we're starting incrementally with $50 million additional, and that's Senate File 388. If people are interested in contacting, it's actually moving through the legislature and in the Senate and the House as we speak. We're so thankful for Senator Dibble, Champion, Representative Keeler for their help and support on this issue. But that's one way, is to really contact your legislature and urge them to support this. Because with those investments, we can continue to reduce the number of youth living in poverty, and then the hope is that they won't become homeless adults living in poverty and their children won't, and that it can really stop the cycle. So there's a lot of different ways, but that is the lens that we work through at the link. And then we also, obviously this would also help prevent and end sexual exploitation and trafficking, because traffickers are also going after those runaway and homeless youth and youth living in poverty as well. So it's just the right thing to do for so many reasons.
Thank you. Now, you spoke a little bit about sex trafficking and some of the work you guys do there. I don't think people really know how much Minnesota is affected by sex trafficking. And us being one of the largest sites because of our beloved Mall of America, and how sometimes things are happening right in front of our eyes and we don't know what we're looking at. Can you kind of talk just a little bit about being aware? Because I think as we talk about poverty, we also have to talk about those who exploit poverty.
Right. Absolutely. So thank you for bringing up this point. We actually are seeing a lot more youth actually recruited online or by their peers or by family members. So just wanted to state that versus locations such as the mall, we're seeing just really high rates of peer-to-peer recruitment, of people recruiting online or family members. And a definite tie is that the young person's vulnerable. They're living in poverty. They're running away from home, experiencing homelessness. So poverty is a huge reason why traffickers lure people into it, because they know this person doesn't have enough money to survive. They're out there on the streets by themselves, so they offer all kinds of dreams that don't end up coming true. They offer these young, well, in my experience has been youth, but they offer them places to stay, opportunities to get clothes, nails done, hair done, all kinds of things that they wouldn't have access to. They offer them supposed lures of earning money that don't end up being true, right? So absolutely, people living in poverty are exploited and preyed upon by all kinds of things, including, unfortunately, sex traffickers.
It's very difficult. Thank you so much for that answer, but also highlighting some differences. Like you said, it's not location so much anymore, but it really is peer-to-peer and sometimes familial, people that are actually luring their loved ones into potentially dangerous and highly exploitative situations.
Yes.
Can you share with our viewers how they can plug in and or stay connected with the amazing work that you and your team are doing at the Link Minnesota?
Sure. Thank you so much for asking that. So we do have a website. It's www.thelinkmn.org, and on it, if you go to get involved, there's ways to volunteer. There are opportunities for employment. We're always looking for good staff members as well, and there's also opportunities to get engaged in the work to end poverty and homelessness and trafficking. So really appreciate that. So if you go to the website, you can follow us also on Facebook.
I was just about to ask, I'm like, do y'all have any social media?
We do. I'm definitely not a social media expert by any means, so we do have a Facebook page, so you can follow us on Facebook as well.
Okay, that's wonderful. And then I'll just have you, if you want to just look directly in that camera and appeal to our networks or to the community and let them know not only what we need or what the link needs to kind of further the work, the amazing work that you guys are doing, or if there's a call to action.
Sure.
Feel free to take a second and then just look right directly.
Sure. So first and foremost, I just want to say a call to action would be to really help to undo those negative stereotypes of people living in poverty with everyone you know. Break up those conversations or those stereotypes as they're being said or happen. Another key thing would be to really support the Homeless Youth Act, to reach out to your elected officials and say that you want them to support the Homeless Youth Act. There's easy ways to find out who your legislator is online. If not, you can feel free to contact us at the link and we'll help you. So those are some key ways. And then to volunteer, either with the link or another nonprofit that provides support for youth or families or adults living in poverty. We are all in this together, and if we work together, we can make a change. Poverty is a solvable issue in our state. So really appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and for you for all that this station is doing to bring awareness. It's wonderful.
Thank you so much. Beth, thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for the amazing work that you and your team are doing at the Link Minnesota. And I really hope that something was shared today that somebody has found encouraging or uplifting, or has started to make them think just a little bit differently, not only just during Poverty Awareness Month, but going forward, period, about what poverty looks like and what we can do to lend ourselves to this amazing, amazing work.
Thank you so much. It's truly an honor.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have. A special thank you to Beth Holger and her amazing team at the Link Minnesota, and all of you for watching. I am so humbled to be with you, and I look forward to connecting again with you soon.